I spent 38 years building houses for other people, and when I finally retired, I built one for myself. Not literally. I'm a retired civil engineer, not a carpenter, but I designed every detail of that cottage on Lac-Saint-Pierre. I chose the lock myself back in 2019, drove up from Longueuil on a cold Saturday in March when the ice was still thick on the water, and stood there in my boots thinking, this is it. This is what all those years were for. 16 months later, the cottage was done. 2 bedrooms, a screened-in porch facing east so I could have my coffee watching the sun come up over the water. A small dock I was unreasonably proud of. My wife, Lorraine, had passed away 4 years before that. She'd have loved it. That thought made me both happy and sad every single morning, and I'd learned to live with both feelings sitting side by side. My son, I'll call him my boy, because that's what he still is to me, even at 34, had married a woman named Vivienne about 2 years after the cottage was finished. I liked Vivienne well enough at first. She was sharp, ambitious, worked in marketing for a pharmaceutical company in Montreal. She had opinions about everything, which I found refreshing until I realized the opinions were mostly about things that weren't hers to have opinions about. The first sign came about 8 months into the marriage. My boy called me on a Tuesday night. He always called on Tuesdays, we had that routine, and he seemed distracted. He mentioned that Vivienne's parents had been having some trouble with their condo in Brossard. Water damage from the unit above. The whole renovation was going to take months, and her mother's health wasn't great. And wouldn't it be nice if there was somewhere they could stay temporarily? I asked him what he meant by temporarily. He said he didn't know exactly. I told him I'd think about it, which was my way of saying no without saying no yet. 3 days later, Vivienne called me herself, not my son, Vivienne. I remember I was out on the dock when my phone rang, watching a pair of loons move across the far end of the lake. She didn't ask how I was doing. She launched straight into it. Her parents needed a place to stay. The cottage had 2 bedrooms and I only used 1. It would just be for the summer, and surely I wasn't going to be selfish about this. That word, selfish. I let it sit in the air for a moment. I told her I would think about it. There's nothing to think about, she said. They need a place. You have a place. This is what families do. I said, Vivienne, your parents are not my family. The silence on the other end of the phone was very loud. I said it gently, but I said it clearly. Her parents were lovely people, I was sure. But the cottage was mine. I had designed it, financed it, built it. It was not a family property in any shared sense. It was my retirement, my home. She hung up without saying goodbye. My boy called 20 minutes later. He sounded exhausted. I could hear it in his voice, that particular exhaustion of a man caught between 2 people he loves, trying to keep everyone happy and failing at all of it. I felt for him. I really did. But I also knew that if I gave an inch here, I'd spend the next decade giving miles. I told him what I'd told Vivienne. I told him I loved him. I told him this was not up for discussion. He said he understood. I wasn't entirely sure he did, but he said it. What I didn't tell him, what I didn't tell anyone, was what I did the following Monday morning. I called my lawyer. Her name is Patricia, and she's been handling my affairs for 15 years. Sharp woman, no nonsense, the kind of lawyer who doesn't waste your money on pleasantries. I told her the situation. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I appreciate about her. When I finished, she said, "You want to make sure this can't happen, correct? Not just now, but later." "Correct," I said. We spent 2 hours that afternoon going through everything. The cottage was already in my name alone, but we reviewed the title, updated certain documents, and I established something I probably should have done years earlier, a proper estate structure that made the disposition of the property absolutely unambiguous. Patricia also drafted a letter, professional, polite, airtight, that clarified the legal standing of the property and what it would mean for any party to occupy it without my explicit written consent. I didn't send the letter to anyone, not yet. I just had it ready. I want to be clear about something. I wasn't doing this out of spite. I wasn't plotting revenge. I was doing what I'd done my entire professional life. I was engineering a solution before the problem became a crisis. 38 years of building infrastructure taught me that the time to reinforce a bridge is before it shows stress, not after it starts to crack. June came. I drove up to the cottage on the Friday of the Victoria Day long weekend, a tradition I'd had since the place was finished. The drive up from Longwill takes about an hour and 40 minutes if the traffic on the 40 is reasonable, which it rarely is on a long weekend, but I don't mind. I use the drive to decompress. The cottage in late May is something special. The bugs aren't bad yet. The water is still cold enough to be bracing but not punishing, and the tourists haven't fully arrived. I had 2 weeks of retirement time planned. Some fishing, some reading, a little woodworking project I'd been putting off, refinishing the Muskoka chairs on the porch. I bought good teak oil for them and everything. I'd been there about 4 days when my son drove up. He didn't call first. That was unusual. He just appeared on Saturday afternoon, his car coming down the gravel lane, and when he got out, he was alone. I stood up from the Muskoka chair I was refinishing and waited. His face told me everything before he said a word. He came up onto the porch, accepted the coffee I offered, and sat down. He looked at the lake for a long time before he spoke. He told me Vivienne had made plans. Her parents were arriving the following Friday. She'd told them the cottage was available. She'd told them it was settled. I set down my brush very carefully. She told them it was settled. I repeated. "Dad," he said, and his voice cracked slightly on that one syllable. I tried to stop it. "I told her you'd said no. She said you'd come around. She said you were just being stubborn and that once they actually needed to be here, you wouldn't be able to turn away an elderly couple." I asked him what he thought. He looked at me. His eyes were tired in a way that went beyond lack of sleep. "I think," he said slowly, "that I've been letting her speak for both of us and that I shouldn't have." We sat with that for a while. The loons were out again. They're almost always out in the evening. I told him about Patricia. I told him about the letter. I told him that I had not been sitting idle these past weeks and that his wife had made a significant miscalculation in assuming that because I hadn't argued loudly, I had conceded. My boy put his face in his hands for a moment, not out of anger at me. I understood that, out of the particular exhaustion of recognizing that a conflict he'd been hoping would dissolve on its own was about to become very real, very soon. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "Nothing dramatic," I said. "I'm going to be here. I'm going to be polite, and I'm going to let Patricia's letter do the talking." He stayed that night. We had a good dinner. I picked up pickerel from a guy down the road who sells out of a cooler on his property. Very good fish, very honest price, and we talked properly for the first time in months. Not about Vivienne, not about the cottage, about his work, about a trip he wanted to take, about a memory he had of coming up here as a kid with his mother and me before the cottage existed, camping on Crown land just east of the lake. We talked until almost midnight, and when we went to bed I felt, despite everything, genuinely at peace. He left Sunday morning. He looked steadier than when he'd arrived. The following Friday, I was back on the porch with my coffee at 7 in the morning when the car arrived. A silver Nissan Rogue, Quebec plates. I watched it come down the lane. Vivienne's parents are in their early 70s. Her father, a broad-shouldered man with white hair who reminded me of no one I could place, got out first, then went around to help his wife. Her mother moved carefully, the way people do when they've had joint problems. They both looked slightly uncertain as they came toward the cottage, the way people do when they arrive somewhere they aren't entirely sure is as settled as they've been told. Vivienne got out last. She was wearing sunglasses and had the particular energy of someone who has decided in advance that everything will go according to plan. I stayed in my chair. I waited until they were at the foot of the porch steps, and then I said, "Good morning." "Morning," Vivienne said briskly. "We'll get started unloading. I assumed you'd take the small bedroom." I looked at her for a moment. Then I said, "Vivienne, before anything gets unloaded, I think you should all sit down. I have something for you to read." I had printed Patricia's letter on good paper and put it in a manila envelope. I held it out to her. She didn't take it immediately. She looked at it, then at me, then at it again. "What is this?" "It's a letter from my lawyer," I said pleasantly. "It clarifies a few things about the legal status of this property and what the situation is regarding occupancy." Her mother made a small sound behind her. Vivienne took the envelope. She opened it. She read it. I watched her eyes move across the page, saw the moment the language registered. Patricia writes with a particular precision that leaves very little room for misunderstanding. The letter noted that the property was solely owned, that no occupancy agreement had been extended to any party, that any occupation without written consent of the owner would constitute trespass under Quebec law, and that the owner had retained counsel to enforce this position if necessary. When she finished, she looked up at me. The sunglasses made it hard to read her expression fully, but her jaw was set in a way that told me everything. "You had your lawyer write a letter," she said. "For family." "For the record," I said, "and because, with respect, your parents are not my family. I have one family, and that's my son." Her father cleared his throat. He said quietly, "Perhaps we should have confirmed this more directly." I appreciated that. I genuinely did. He was a man who could read a room, and he could see that this had not, in fact, been settled. "You're welcome to use the dock for the afternoon," I said. "I can point you toward a very nice B&B in Saint-François-du-Lac. The owners are good people, reasonable rates, or there are a few rentals in the area that might have availability for the season. I can look that up for you if it would help." The silence lasted about 30 seconds, which felt much longer. Vivienne said through her teeth, "We drove 3 hours." "I understand," I said, "and I'm sorry that the situation wasn't made clearer to you before you made the drive. That's not something I had control over." She looked at her parents. Her father put his hand briefly on her shoulder. Her mother was looking at the lake, and I noticed she seemed less tense than Vivienne, as though she'd half expected something like this. They unloaded nothing. They had coffee, I offered, and her parents accepted, because whatever anger Vivienne felt, her parents were not going to be rude to an old man on his own porch. We sat for about 40 minutes. Her father asked me about the dock construction, and we had a genuinely pleasant conversation about load-bearing capacity and the specifics of pressure-treated lumber in freshwater environments. He'd done some renovation work himself years ago. Her mother asked me about the loons. When they left, Vivienne did not say goodbye to me. Her parents both thanked me for the coffee. I sat back down in my chair and finished my coffee, which had gone cold. I didn't mind. My son called that evening. He'd heard from Vivienne clearly. He was quiet for a moment when I answered, and then he said, "How did it go?" "Civilly," I said. "No one shouted. No one cried. Patricia's letter was very effective. He made a sound that was almost a laugh. 'Dad,' he said, 'I owe you an apology.' 'You don't,' I said. 'I do,' he said. 'I do,' he said. I let this go further than it should have. I kept thinking it would resolve itself, and it didn't. And you had to deal with it because I didn't." We talked for a long time that night. Not about Vivienne specifically. That was between the two of them, and I wasn't going to put my thumb on the scale of his marriage any more than I already had. But we talked about what it means to hold a line, about the difference between being difficult and being clear, about how the two things look the same from the outside to people who don't want to hear no. I told him about something his mother used to say. She used to say that the people who call you selfish for having boundaries are usually the people who benefit most from you not having any. He was quiet for a moment after that. That sounds like her, he said. It was very much her, I said. The rest of that June was exactly what I'd planned. I finished the Muskoka chairs. I caught enough pickerel for several good dinners. I read 3 novels, 2 of them good, 1 of them a mistake I won't repeat. A friend of mine from my engineering days came up for a long weekend, and we sat on the porch until 2 in the morning, 2 nights running, talking about nothing and everything, the way you can only do with someone you've known for 30 years. A few weeks later, my son came back up with Vivienne. I wasn't sure what to expect. She was quieter than usual, not cold exactly, but careful in the way people are when they've recalibrated. We didn't discuss the June visit. I didn't bring it up, and neither did she. We had dinner on the porch, the 3 of us, and watched the sun go down over the water. At one point she said, unprompted, that the dock was very well built. I thanked her. It wasn't a reconciliation exactly. It was something more useful than that. It was an understanding. She knew where I stood. I knew what she was capable of. And somewhere in the middle of that knowledge, we found a way to be in the same space without pretending the past few months hadn't happened. Her parents, I understand, found a rental property in Chambly for the summer. It worked out fine for them. The renovation on their condo was finished by August. I didn't feel triumphant about any of it. That's not the right word. What I felt was what I always feel when a structure holds under load. A quiet, solid satisfaction. Not excitement, just the knowledge that the thing was built right and it did what it was supposed to do. Lorraine would have said I was being too engineer-brained about the whole thing. She would have been right, and she would have said it while laughing, and I would have said that's the only way I know how to be. I'm writing this from the porch. It's early September now. The mornings have that first edge of cool that tells you autumn is thinking about arriving. The loons are still here, though they'll be gone soon. They head south before the ice, which is sensible. The teak oil did a beautiful job on the chairs. The lake is very still this morning. I have my coffee. This is what I built all of it for. And it is exactly as good as I knew it would be. There's something I've thought about a lot since that June morning on the porch, the way Vivian's father shook my hand before he got back in the car. He didn't have to do that. He could have just left, but he did it anyway. And I think that small gesture told me everything about how this whole situation had actually unfolded. His daughter had made promises she had no right to make, and he was man enough to recognize it, even if he couldn't say so out loud. I don't think Vivienne is a bad person. I've thought about that too. I think she's someone who learned, somewhere along the way, that pushing hard enough and framing things as already decided was a reliable way to get what she wanted. And for a long time, it probably worked. It worked on my son, who loves her and didn't want the conflict. It might have worked on me, if I'd been someone who confused keeping the peace with being decent. But here's what I've come to understand. The way you conduct yourself when something important is at stake, your property, your autonomy, the boundaries you've drawn around the life you built. That's not just about winning or losing a particular argument. It's about what kind of person you're choosing to be under pressure. Vivienne chose to act as though my feelings on the matter were an obstacle to manage rather than a position to respect. I chose to prepare quietly, act clearly, and say what I meant without cruelty. I'm not saying I handled everything perfectly. There were moments I could have spoken sooner, been more direct with my son earlier, saved everyone some time and tension. That's on me. But when it counted, I didn't panic and I didn't fold. 38 years of engineering taught me that the worst outcomes happen when people react emotionally to problems that require clear thinking. The same is true, I've found, in the rest of life. What strikes me most, looking back, is that the letter Patricia wrote All those careful, precise legal sentences was only possible because I'd taken the time to think before I acted. I didn't call a lawyer the night Vivienne hung up on me out of anger. I waited. I thought it through. I asked myself what outcome I actually wanted and what steps would get me there. That kind of patience isn't passive. It takes more effort than shouting does. My son came out of it better, I think, not unscathed. There's still work to do in his marriage, and that's his work to do, not mine, but clearer about what he stands for. He told me that the conversation we had on the porch that Saturday night, the one about holding a line, stayed with him. I hope it did. I hope he carries it forward. Lorraine used to say, the people who call you selfish for having limits are usually the ones who benefit most from you not having any. She was right about a lot of things. She was especially right about that. The cottage is still there. The Muskoka chairs look beautiful. The loons came back this spring, same as always. Some things, if you build them right and protect them well, hold up exactly as long as they're supposed to.